Hi, so welcome. Today we're going to be talking about the lost experiences of social, lifestyle, behaviors of people in substance use recovery. My name is Elizabeth Beckman,
My name is Allison Kalfas.
and we'll go ahead and get started. So the first thing that we want to talk about is just about the lost experiences of the social, lifestyle, and behaviors of people in substance use recovery. So with this, the first thing that I thought was appropriate was to go over the definition of recovery. So one that I found that I really liked was by the Recovery Science Research Collaborative. They say recovery is an individualized, intentional, dynamic, and relational process involving sustained efforts to improve wellness. So, just a really good holistic definition to get us started. So, when we're talking about that, when people recover from substance use disorders, and you might later in the slides, you might see this called SUDs, substance use disorders, some SUDs, but many aspects of their lives change. Some of these losses a person can experience because of these changes can be the distraction, relaxation, the intensity, and the high that their substance offered them, rituals surrounding their substance use behavior, the relationships that person often loses after recovering, and the freedom that person loses after recovering. That was talked about by Weiss, and just the fact that recovery can impact so many different aspects. Oops, sorry about that. Next, we'll go into about the lost experiences of social lifestyle behaviors of people in substance use recovery. We'll just continue on that. Talking more about the stress reduction losses. So, substances can offer that quick stress reduction, like with relaxing. Alcohol affects those neurotransmitter systems like GABA. So, it has a direct effect on quieting the nervous system specifically. And alcohol specifically, you let go of worries for like the reasons that we talked about above. And substances are sometimes used to like loosen your inhibitions, specifically alcohol again, but people can use this to like let their guard down a little bit. So that's kind of that stress reduction that that substance will give them. And that was Johan. And then talking more about the ritual and the freedom losses. So I think these are kind of a little bit entwined. So initially, when you go through withdrawal symptoms and you conquer cravings when you're first starting your steps in recovery, and then you're stepping back into the world and resuming like that normal lifestyle. And after spending years using substances, it's been compared to like coming out of a cave. And that was Narconon International. And I just thought that was very poignant. It makes sense because that is such a drastic change from going that living that lifestyle where you're using that substance and then completely being in recovery. It's like night and day. Next, we'll talk more about the social losses. So, successful recovery often means switching from social groups that are supportive of your substance use to social groups that are supportive of abstinence and recovery. So, this change reduces exposure and can help people acquire recovery coping skills and abstinence self efficacy. That was Kelly et al. But that's just kind of talking about you have to let some of the people in your life go from when you were using those substances because they could still be using those substances and that could be a hindrance on your recovery. And also, people bond over substances. I mean, particularly alcohol. Like many social events are based around alcohol. Hey, do you want to go out for a drink? Hey, we'll have wine with dinner, things like that. So, Gilhan talked about that in that article too. I thought that was really good. He's a person who is in recovery himself. So I thought that was a really good example of what people are going through. Next, we'll talk about the scope of loss experiences of social lifestyle behaviors of people in substance use recovery. So, 19.7 million American adults aged 12 and older battled a substance use disorder in 2017, and that's from SAMHSA. And I find that statistic astronomical about the rates of substance use disorders in our country. Fascinating. But kind of furthering that little tunnel that we're kind of focusing on is even smaller than that. So, addiction is considered a highly treatable disease and recovery is attainable. About 10% of American adults who are at least 18 years old say that they're in recovery from alcohol or drug abuse issues. And that was from a New York State Office of Alcoholism and Substance Abuse Services Administration that was in 2018, I'm pretty sure. So that one, it just kind of like lessens the scope because this is specifically what we're talking about. But 10% of American adults is still, I feel like, a good chunk of people who we might know.
So next, I'm going to talk about a study that I really liked that I found while we were researching this specific issue. And it was called Needlework, The Lives of Female Injectors. It was run in the late 90s, and all of the information was compiled by a researcher named Avril Taylor. But in 1998, the study was finished in Glasgow, Scotland. 26 women between the ages of 17 to 34 were observed and then interviewed in depth about their drug use and their recovery from drug use. When they spoke about trying to stop using, the study found that only one of those 26 women had been able to quit and stay drug-free for multiple years. Her interview later in the article says that she had been free of injecting for a whole 5 years. The rest of these women, they did want to quit, they did want to stop, but they kept falling into this pattern of stopping and then restarting. And so I looked further at that part of the article to the people that had stopped and restarted and stopped. And the women that fell into that section, they said, well, why do you think, because you are the one that experienced this, why do you think you weren't able to stop and stay sober? What do you think? And the women that stopped and had to go back mentioned several of these things that I have down here on the PowerPoint. So quitting meant losing their social circle. I know Elizabeth talked about it in the past slide, but their social circle was their life. And because their drug use had pushed them away from the normal, what was societally acceptable, their social circle that accepted them then was their family. It was all they had. So leaving that lifestyle meant losing all of them. Not having drugs to use left them with a lack of motivation. They lost their reason to get up in the morning. For some of them, it was got to get up, got to get my next fix, and keep working to do that. So losing that meant losing your whole reason for going about your day. It's harder to stay straight was was one of the phrases they used a lot, was staying straight or going straight. It was harder to stay that way and make money because a lot of them fell into prostitution or stealing to get their fix and to make sure they were taking care of themselves. But if you can't do any of those things while you are trying to get over your drug use, you have to get a normal job. Nobody really wants to give you a job if they find out that you're recovering from a substance use disorder. So it was hard for them to make money. They lost their routines, and new routines aren't easy to fit into. They felt a lot of isolation and loneliness, going back again to their loss of a social circle. And then we'll talk about this a little later, the stigma surrounding female drug users. They mentioned at one point in the article, when men are seen as having a substance use disorder, it's, oh, well, they don't have good willpower. Oh, well, they're not as strong-willed as other men. When women have a substance use disorder, and especially these women that already struggled with it, they felt more put down by society. They felt it wasn't just like, oh, she doesn't have a strong willpower. It was, oh, there's something wrong with her. She's lower than low. And so a lot of that stigma worked into them not feeling comfortable continuing their recovery.
Yeah, so going along with that, I mean, kind of why does this all matter? Why are we presenting on this specific topic? So one quote that I really liked was from Grant and Bill Shackelford. It was, feeling part of a physical community was widely believed to be vital to sobriety success. So these people going through recovery from substance use disorders, their community is absolutely everything. This study in particular, it was a study to see if non-face-to-face methods would be just as useful to clients in recovery. And I mean, just at that time during that study, it really wasn't as impactful just because of the importance of that community and those people and those connections. So it's just super important. We want to hammer that in. And a couple of things the National Council for Behavioral Health went over, just a couple of points of why this matters so much. So many people in recovery feel judged by their family and their friends, like Allison was talking about earlier. We want to accept them for who they are and refrain from criticism and negativity. And I mean, our part as helpers, we can help with that. We can be that non judgmental voice and presence. Two, recovery is a long, complex process. Recovery lasts ideally your whole lifetime. I mean, people often have setbacks. It's important for them to know that you're still supporting them when things get tough. I mean, you can have a lapse and it doesn't have to turn into a relapse. You can have a one-time use and it doesn't have to turn into relapse. So their community being there for them and helpers being there for them is vital. Another thing, like other chronic diseases, people can manage addiction successfully. There are drugs that can assist. There are things like AA, other, and we'll talk about that further, other groups that can assist. And us as helpers, we're here to help and to listen.
So I kind of mentioned it back on the other slide about the Glasgow study, but one of the things we wanted to discuss was the stigma related with people recovering from substance use disorders. Because you may be asking, how does this affect people who are recovering in their loss experiences? Well, as we were going through and researching, one of the largest reasons people who are recovering won't seek treatment is because of the stigmas attached to recovery and to them. In our own personal life, it might feel like it's so far removed, but just recently, in recent years, there have been efforts to stop recovery in Campbell County. A personal story time for this, my aunt was posting something on Facebook a couple years ago that was like, we don't need recovery centers in our suburban area. We don't need all that out here. And I'm like, do users not exist in Campbell County? They do. And they need somewhere that is safe to go. But this group of people out in Campbell was so afraid of these individuals that they didn't know, that they were like, oh, well, we don't want them here. We don't want them here. That is such a damaging idea and such a damaging thing to put out into the public eye. One of the articles I read said the stigma surrounding treatment is often what will keep individuals from seeking recovery. According to Zwick, Appleseth, and Arndt, individuals in treatment acknowledge that when family members or friends have suggested they get treatment, their response would be, treatment is for losers and I'm not a loser. I don't need to sit around and talking to druggies. They've learned this bad view of themselves from society. And so when somebody is trying to recover, trying to do that, that is adding to the grief and the loss they feel. Another one I found was very prevalent was stigma is still the largest challenge we face. It prevents people from coming into treatment. The moment was right for this person who was talking to speak out, and they didn't. And it says, if we're talking about ending stigma, people have to speak up. We have to, as helpers, say, like, we're not gonna tolerate this continued stigma against drug users, because it is adding to their grief, adding to their loss. And looking at all this together in relation to what we've learned in class, a recovering user facing all these stigmas and facing this, they're facing a loss of security, because their former life, when they were stable in their drug use, they had some sense of security. They had some sense of togetherness with their community, and leaving that, they've lost that. So the next slide has just a list of different things that were recommended to fight the stigma. I know that everyone in class isn't going to be able to educate professionals, but these are still some good things to keep in mind when we realize, or when we consider the stigmas that are still prevalent in our own family groups, our own friend groups, educate yourself about substance use disorder and the effects. When writing a paper for class, be selective about the words you use, and remember people who use substances are first and foremost people. They're still people. They still matter. Speak out against substance use stigma. Educate again about the use of medications for substance use disorder. Listen, but withhold judgment. If you're going to listen to somebody, don't put the judgment on them. Keep it to yourself. Treat everyone with dignity and respect. Avoid hurtful or dehumanizing labels. Demand equality and in medical coverage. That's a big one that we need to, as a society, bring back up. Petition government lawmakers for less criminal penalties, and use social media to get the message out. Everybody can do something with social media.
Agreed. And so going further to kind of those impacts, we wanted to touch on COVID-19 impacts just because it has been such a great impact on almost everyone, but specifically this population that we're looking at. So this was an Hurley et al. Study. They finished up in 2021, but this happened in 2020 when the pandemic was first starting, and they wanted to get people's opinions about people who were in recovery from substance use disorders, what's going on with them, what's happening. So I really liked this study. Some of the quotes were, participants overwhelmingly reported negative feelings such as guilt, gloom, fear, panic, restlessness, and stress, as well as reduced feelings of connectedness to healthcare and support groups. Just like Allison was saying with that loss of healthcare and things. Those new into recovery expressed concerns about relapsing. I mean, just the stress of the pandemic alone, nonetheless, trying to stay sober through all of this had a huge impact on these people. So participants considered social relationships as key to recovery. Again, one of the whole reasons that we're looking at this is because social connections matter, specifically in regards to recovery. Thus, reduced access to friends, partners, and family became the defining challenges of April and May, specifically of 2020, like during the height of the pandemic in the United States. And that was causing significant, even devastating effects on mental health and well-being. So this touches on all of the things that we're looking at. We're as helpers, we're taking care of people's mental health. We're helping them with that. We're helping them with their well-being, and we're helping them in their recovery journeys if need be too. So to go even further, what can be done about all of this? So recovery services and supports must be flexible. I mean, supporting a recovery requires mental health and addiction services do a bunch of things, but it's just mainly being flexible. As a helper, what does your client need? What are their, because everybody's needs are going to be different. My needs could be different from Allison's, could be different from a client that you have. So just be responsive and respectful, like Allison and I have been saying the whole time, and like Allison said specifically, we like to talk people first. So this is a person with a substance use disorder. This is a person recovering from a substance use disorder. So that's really critical. We want to put that person first. So just be respectful to the health beliefs, the practices, and the cultural and linguistic needs of the diverse people and groups too. I mean, my culture is probably different from Allison's, could be different from anybody's. So just be very respectful of that individual. Actively address the diversity in the delivery of services. If you're a helper, speak out on these things if you see those gaps. And seek to reduce health disparities and access and outcomes, just like Allison was saying earlier. And this is what SAMHSA was talking about in 2020, all those things that we can do as helpers to keep that going.
Just a few more points to let y'all know before we wrap up. I looked at a second study of people that are recovering from a substance use disorder. And with a study of 30 from the United States, they had a lot to talk about with what treatments that they believed worked for themselves and what attitudes they felt like a recovering substance abuse user needed to bring to the table to make things work for them. And most of the individuals that participated in the study said that the treatments they recommended had definitive structure and people to keep them accountable. So they wanted to go to therapy. They thought group therapy was good for them. And some of the suggestions they had for people that are seeking treatment were submitting to treatment, facing the struggle to balance rigid treatment structures with a need for autonomy, because that's one of the things that really needed to be there in their recovery, was they needed to have that sense of autonomy and like, I'm doing this for me, and I am part of it. Surrendering to trust and love. They called it building a whole new person, but just finding that community that is there to back you up, finding those people that are there to help you, and then taking on personal responsibility and gaining autonomy. It has to be me, it cannot be you. For them, it was they had to be the ones to choose. They had to be the ones that made the decision to step into recovery. And I think this study was so important to the point Elizabeth and I are trying to make, that grief and loss affects them just as much, because all of these things are little ways that they can kind of chink away at feeling lonely or not having the community to back them up. And then the last part of the slide I have right here is the later phases of recovery investigated in this study were often associated with a sense of citizenship, stable abstinence, and a high level functioning, including competitive work and drug-free social network. So having looked for recovery and put all this stuff into their treatment, they were able to find stable abstinence like the group from Glasgow wasn't. They were able to function well, find sustaining work that made them feel good, and find a social network. And so all of these things together helped them get through that grief and loss. And then the last thing I wanted to, well, one of the last things I wanted to show you all, because if you couldn't tell, I am very passionate about this subject. This is a list of different organizations, like Elizabeth was talking about, what can you do, what can be done. These organizations, the first one, NKYNA, is for Narcotics Anonymous. It's for anybody that's had issues with that, or the NKYAA. You can find group sessions for them. Nar-Anon and NKY Hates Heroin are actually support groups for the family and friends of people who are using, who have that SUD. And you can find groups to attend and let your family and friends know that you are with them, you're standing with them, you want to be part of their recovery. And then at the bottom, there's adultchildren.org, which is the same, but for Alcoholics Anonymous. So it's a group that you can meet up to support your loved one that is in AA. And I think that is just one of the most vital things that we could impress upon you all, is that it is important to, when you have a loved one or a friend that is struggling with this, just come alongside them and be there for them. So in conclusion, the losses grieved most while entering treatment included loss of freedom of choice, the loss of time, and the loss of self-respect. Clients entering recovery have to deal not only with giving up the substance, but also with encountering unresolved grief from previous losses, losing their identity as an addict. And we don't like that word much anymore, addict, but for some people that became their whole identity. And so losing your identity is not a fun loss to go through. Giving up ways of coping and shifting their belief system and views of life. These are all incredibly big losses to have to go through and to continue on and be well.
So with that being said, that's all, folks. We appreciate you coming on the ride for us, but these are my sources right here if you like to investigate further. And then Allison has hers right here, but we appreciate you guys all. You have a great day. Thanks for listening.